Welcome to DigitalK.
How many of you are in management? How many of you are responsible for teams of people or product? Okay, a little higher. How many of you have been doing it for 10 years? 15? Okay, so we've got some veterans out here. Great. My name is Shobhana. I go by Shobs. I've been working in the tech environment for the past 25 years. I've spent the last 18 in leadership and management. And for the past 4 years, I've been working at Uber. I lead their IT organization. And I'm here to talk to you about leading and my leadership principles. Of all the skills of leadership, listening is the most valuable and one of the least understood. And if I might add, one of the least used. Why is it so? As leaders, at least when we were ascending the ranks, we were rewarded for solving problems. We were rewarded for having the answers. We were rewarded for delivering on solutions. And suddenly now that I'm a leader, I need to not just learn, but be very good with this different skill, which is listening. I went to an MBA school, a really good one in America, and I remember going to classes for solutioning, for critical reasoning and thinking, but I never went to a class for listening. So that was a little hard for me to first understand and start to get to do it well. And remember, that's just one of the skills of leadership we're talking about. Let's also understand how else things have changed for leaders of today. Everything around us is changing, constantly. Leadership too. But how is that different for the leaders of yesteryears? How is that different for our role models? How is it different than what Jack Welch might have thought? A key difference in today's world is the rate of change. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the timeline to go from a concept, from inception of an idea, to design, to production, to market, might have been a few years. Now, in Silicon Valley, where I spend most of my time, there are a ton of entrepreneurs and startups where they go from a concept to market in a few months. Things change, and things change fast. On people evolution side, things change really fast too. So a couple of decades ago, performance management used to be, and I used to be on the receiving end of it, but I used to sit down once a year with my managers and we used to talk about how things were and what did I want to do and how did I want to grow. Mostly it was how I was fucking up on certain things or doing certain things really well. But as time changed, we started doing more constant, more relatively quicker evaluations. At Uber, we used to do something called T3B3, very quick, very fast, top 3, bottom 3 as a person. From there, we kind of moved to 5 to 1. We were trying to evaluate people on what they do great, like 5 things you do great versus 1 that you need to work on. I'm sure by the time I get back home, there'll be a whole new way of evaluating and motivating people. I'll let you know what that is when I get home. But the point being, everything is changing. And how does that affect us as leaders? I feel we have to reinvent ourselves constantly and quickly. If leaders do not listen to learn, let's listen and listen to learn, we will not survive. And that's true both for people and for companies. One of Uber's co-founders used to say, if you don't constantly think about the future, you won't be in it. I think what he really meant was if you don't constantly obsess about the future, if you don't constantly learn to read the signals, if you don't constantly reinvent yourself, you will not be in the future. So what does that mean to us as leaders? We evolve quickly or we die. We evolve fast, we evolve positively, or we regress being leaders. We can go back to being managers, we can be wonderful managers, we can go back to being bosses, but we won't be leaders. Now, there's a lot of traits in leadership, and I'm sure we would all love to spend the next 15 hours talking about it. No? Okay. So the two things I want to focus on in the next 10 minutes is going to be listening and learning. Listening is an art that requires attention over talent, spirit over ego, others over self. Now, that itself is deep enough. But if we try and figure out like a few things that we can use in everyday world, what would that be? If we try and figure out one key skill for listening, if we figure out what kind of a culture we want to create as leaders for listening, and finally figure out who do we listen to, what would those three things be? A key trait, a key skill to be a good listener is humility. Again, the best leaders know that they don't have all the answers, especially in this fast-changing world. Internalizing that and showing our vulnerability as a leader, where we ask for input, where we are constantly sensing for signals, is very important. What happens if we just go back home and we ask for signals and we ask for inputs? Do we get that? That requires a different culture at work. That requires a culture of trust and openness. There are ideas, there are audacious ideas, and then there are dreams. As leaders, how do we treat that? When we are focused on a time-bound project and we are looking for answers, how do you treat dreams? I know in my past I've handled them badly. But that's the culture that you want to create, where everybody is comfortable to speak up and give their ideas. And one bad handling of a situation can break that trust. This culture is also important for diversity and inclusion. We all have pockets and groups of people in our organizations who are afraid to speak up. What do we do as leaders to make them comfortable to speak up and make sure that their ideas are heard? And then finally, if we say we're going to be great listeners and listening is important, who the hell are we listening to? Is it just our teams? Is it our bosses? Is it our peers? Is it our customers? Is it all of the above and more? One key area where we should be listening is also our competitive landscape. How are things changing in the industry and how can that affect us? As a tech executive, I do appreciate the VC circles, the venture capitalists who have a pulse on what technology is new and upcoming. That technology can disrupt my product or my company, but more importantly, that product can also help me optimize what I do. Let's talk about a couple of examples. So when Uber came into existence about a decade ago, our product was very different than what you might have experienced today in cities other than Sofia. So I think it was 2011, maybe around that time, is when we rolled out our app. And at that time, our app only allowed users to hail black luxury cars. And the cost was more expensive than taxis. I remember when I first observed an Uber being ordered. We went out for a happy hour. It was a group of friends from work. And after the happy hour, we were all trying to hail our taxis. And one of my friends whipped out her phone and started ordering her Uber. And we all stopped our taxi hailing thing and crowded around her phone where we could see the app and we could follow the black car on the app. That itself was magical. It was really, really cool. And as a company, maybe Uber could have stopped there, but they listened to the signals of the market. That product, which was a more expensive product than what was available in the market, was only for a small segment of our customer base. Over time, Uber tried to understand what was the gap between what is available in the market and what the customers needed. And it evolved into the product that you see today, which is a peer-to-peer ride-sharing organization, an app, and the cost is at a very different price point. So that's a commercially available product that changed, pivoted based on industry input. The other example I have is something that was created internally by my team. So to give you some background, today Uber is in 60 plus countries, in 700 cities, and 6 continents. That means that there are a lot of offices around the world, and my team is responsible for lighting those up. A comparable company lights up 4 to 5 offices a year. Uber does that in a week. The long pole in lighting up an office is usually connectivity. Around the world, my team takes somewhere between 30 to 90 days to get connectivity in an office. If you're trying to do that for 4 or 5 offices a week, trust me, that doesn't work. It was way too long. We were not answering the demands of our customers, which was our operations people. And there was a lot of angst because we were slowing down the business. So we put a tiger team together, and one of the things they did was analyze the different solutions around in the world. Out of that tiger team came an innovation for us, which was rapid Wi-Fi. It's a mobile Wi-Fi in a box. We could ship it around the world. It took us less than 2 weeks. We could light up an office in 2 weeks. And that box provided not just connectivity, but secure connectivity, something that is required for our employees to be able to work with internal tools. Again, something that wasn't there in the market. We were sure, in fact, we knew that the traditional ways of doing things were not going to help us, and we innovated to come up with that. So that's about listening. Now, what happens if we listen, we have the right signals, we are sensing some input, but we are unable to learn from it? We are unable to adapt. Listening without changing is just good intentions. And the road to hell or failure is paved with good intentions. If we listen but don't react accordingly, we're not going to be successful. So let's talk about learning. That's the other part of this conversation. What are the skills needed for learning? What is the culture we want to create for constant learning? And how do we measure it? What is really learning? In part of skills, it's important to be adaptable and agile. If we do not take the signals and we don't change our plans or our roadmaps, we are not going to be successful. Again, we discussed how quickly things change in today's world. The culture we want to create is of acceptable failure. In fact, failure should be celebrated, not just be accepted, as long as it's done in the pursuit of excellence. At Uber, we run thousands of experiments annually. So basically, we'll make small product tweaks. We'll have small features. We'll roll it out to a small percentage of our users, whether they are drivers or riders or eaters. And then we will track that feature change. We'll try and understand if the change is producing the result we want or not. And a lot of those experiments would fail. And that's okay. We're okay with it. We understand that not experiments are going to succeed. And the culture we want is that we learn from the failure. We learn why it did not affect the KPI we wanted, so we can try the next version to be better. And finally, measurement of success. When you have thousands of experiments running, you want to be very meticulous about how you define success. A particular feature, is it rolled out to make the cabs come quicker, or to make the cost less, or to increase CSAT, or all of the above, or none of the above? What is our target for a particular feature change? A lot of times when we are talking about changes and we're talking about agility, we forget to define success criteria, and that's really important. Couple of examples that did not work well for us, but hopefully we learned from it. So Uber Rush was an on-demand delivery service which connected couriers with entities who wanted to deliver packages. That could be companies or people. We rolled it out a few years ago. We tried it for some time, and we failed, and we called it a failure, and we stopped that service. There were several things that didn't go exactly as we planned, but a few key things were, it is difficult to pair a biker or a walker with a package without really understanding the dimensions of it. So imagine you're a bike courier and you get called, could you move the piano to my mom's house? That does not work. Well, that might be an extreme example. Even package sizes and shapes and weight can be so different. A walker could take a certain amount of weight, a bike courier could take a different amount of weight, but logistically, having our app and our logic mapping all of that and the margins involved proved to be not advantageous for us. We figured we couldn't do it, but we learned a lot about this capacity planning and the logistics and applied it to Uber Eats, which is another one of our verticals, where we deliver food. Thankfully, food packages cannot be so different in dimensions and sizes. A piano-sized food delivery is almost unheard of. I say almost, but it really is. One of the other examples of failure was an internal tech product tech system we tried to bring in and we failed. I mean, a lot of us in technology know that projects and programs sometimes don't go as designed, but the key is how do we learn from it? As Uber was growing and we had offices all around the world, we decided to bring in an automated contract lifecycle management system. Key issue there was a conflict between the tech and the business teams. We did not do process optimization, tried to lift and shift something that existed into a system, and it was not a success. Phase 2 of it, which we are working on now, is something that we started and we focused only on process optimization even before we started the project. So hopefully that'll be better than phase 1. It's going better, but we'll let you know when it's done. So how does all of this listening and learning, how do we connect it back to leading? Andy Stanley, who is a pastor and an author, said, leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. I want to add to it, leaders who don't listen and learn will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say and no ideas to experiment. How do we want our leadership to be? Do we want to be surrounded by people with ideas, audacious ideas, and dreams? Do we want to try to disrupt existing industries? Do we want to create that kind of an impact? Or we want to be surrounded by people who are yes people? And if that is the case, then how does that evolve us to be better leaders? So what do we do next week when we go back to work? Or what do you do next week when you go back to work? When you think about this conference, when you think about this session, how is it that we can apply some of these things in our everyday work? We know listening and learning are key inputs into today's model. But how do we know if we are good listeners? Am I a good listener? Are you a good listener? Are you learning fast enough? Are you learning deep enough? Are you evolving? And what is our success criteria? It would be great if next week you sit down and think about this. One of the ways to evaluate whether we are listening is how much time do you spend speaking in a meeting versus your team? Look at your roadmaps, look at your plans and programs. How much of it is top-down, coming from you, directed by you, versus bottoms-up? How many times are you changing your roadmap based on external conditions? How adaptable and agile are you? When you think about learning, let's talk about how many experiments are you running? How many projects or programs are you running where you are not confident of its success, but if it succeeds, it would be fabulous. Around learning, how is your root cause analysis process? We call it RCA at Uber. But are we creating an environment that when we fail, we actually put time and we think about why we failed and how can we better next time? Or is failing just a shameful thing? Finally, think about, are there pockets of silence in your organization? Are there people who are not speaking up? Are there people who are learning from things but just not sharing? And if that's the case, how do we resolve that?